Welcome to the How to Be Awesome at Your Job podcast, the show where brilliant professionals share how to sharpen the universal skills required to flourish at work. Enjoy more career fun, wins, meaning, and money with your host, Pete Makaitis.
Well, hello, and welcome to episode 31. And I hope you are going to be kicking off a lovely 4th of July weekend to American listeners. We've got some holiday fun, and if you're not in the United States, well, I still hope it's a great 4th of July weekend, even if it's not so meaningful as an actual date or holiday here. But today we are chatting with Julia Atkinson, and we brought in a little bit of fun international flavor here. So we're going to talk about what it's like working in the United States versus in different countries. And I made this one kind of a lighter, funner, shorter one, and we couldn't help it. We also got into the Myers-Briggs a little bit. We're both ENFJs. That is, we prefer extroversion, intuition, feeling, and judging. And we'll kind of talk about what all that means if you're not familiar. So here's the scoop. You're going to learn, 1, the differences between Eastern and Western styles of communication. 2, a quick rundown of the 4 different Myers-Briggs preferences from ENFJ to ISTP. And 3, what is Guanxi, a Chinese word that has worldview implications wherever you are. So a quick bit about Julia. Julia Atkinson is an executive coach with more than 8 years of experience living and working in China before taking her business to the U.S. in Chicago. She's got 10 years of leading teams in multinationals and IT and telecommunications, giving her a first-hand corporate know-how. She has used an interactive coaching process to help clients attain awareness of deeply rooted beliefs and values and related behaviors. From that awareness, she helps them identify and implement shifts that will affect lasting change where they want it. So if you want to check out the show notes, the transcript, things mentioned here, you can find that at awesomeatyourjob.com/ep31. Or if you want to just read the summary in 2 minutes or less, just sign up for the Gold Nugget email list and you'll have that. Here's Julia. Julia, thanks so much for appearing here on the How to Be Awesome at Your Job podcast.
Well, thanks a lot for inviting me, Pete.
Oh, well, I think we're going to have a lot of fun here. And you are a fellow ENFJ, according to the Myers-Briggs preferences, and we can dig into some of that. But the first background piece I'd love to hear from you is, what's the story? You've done some work in Germany and China and U.S. How and why did you end up in each of these places to be an almost a Chicagoan now?
Almost as good, yeah. So it's a long story. To cut it short, I started working in Germany. I worked in startups and in corporate, and eventually got offered, my husband's got offered a job in China, and we went and said we'd only stay a year, and then ended up staying nearly 9. So in China, I also worked in corporate for a year or so, and then decided to do coaching. And have in China 2.5 years or so, and then moved to America again for my husband's job.
All right. Well, welcome. It's great to have you here in this country. And so you have a lot of experience doing coaching. Can you orient us a little bit to what that means? If you're working with a team, what are the kind of the most frequently occurring kinds of issues that you'd be tackling for those teams?
Okay, so as we said earlier, I'm also doing Myers-Briggs. So one of the things quite commonly, and that really doesn't matter so much which culture I work in, is that people try and find their synergies and work with the differences in a positive way rather than argue about the differences and the ways of working. And because I've lived in different cultures and worked with a lot of intercultural teams, culture comes also into the mix as a difference quite often.
Certainly. And so could you share a little bit, what are some cultural differences that you've seen in terms of, you've done coaching work in the US, you've done coaching work in China. What are some key differences that are quite clear to you, having worked in both spots?
So if you have mixed teams, this is when it gets most difficult, obviously. One of the main things that people struggle with is the way we communicate. So Chinese, for example, are very collectivistic and really think about the group rather than about the individual. Mm-hmm. So they also, when they communicate, have a very indirect communication style. And if we look at the West, and that's the same in Europe as well as America, we are very direct and communicate in a very candid way, which usually leads to conflict if you have mixed teams.
Oh, certainly. Could you maybe bring that to life for us? Share an example of a conflict or misunderstanding that emerged as a result of these things clashing?
So one of the things that you have in China is that you need to control a lot more when you work with Chinese teams. So you need to check and recheck, and you need to give a lot of instructions because Chinese corporations or people working in China are used to hierarchy. And in the West, we quite often expect people to do stuff themselves and, check in if there's a problem and control less. And one of the examples I had was I was running a leadership workshop with a big chemical company. There was an issue with reusing some barrels, and someone got hurt. And the guy had to then really leave the workshop. And so even if you have procedures and protocols in place and say, don't do this is not allowed, it's not safe, you still have to constantly check what's happening on the factory floor.
Well, I'm just thinking, and this is maybe my U.S.-ness talking here, but I'm just thinking, oh man, that sounds exhausting and like a lot of effort and work to have to do the follow-up repeatedly. And so is your stance here that there no way is a superior, or they're superior under particular circumstances? Or how should we think about that, navigating the, hey, you should do it my way, versus, well, that's just the way you operate, and so I need to accommodate to you, versus, negotiating, compromising somewhere in the middle? How do you navigate some of that?
I really think you can't say one way is better than the other. It just is what it is. I think it's really important, though, when you work in China or with China, to adapt yourself, because you will fail if you don't. So you can't really say, well, you have to all go my way or the highway going into that market, because that's just not going to work. So I think you need to learn the language, you need to understand the culture, and just adapt yourself if you want to work with them. Okay,
understood. And so that's kind of the cultural adaptation piece. I'm curious to hear, what have you seen that's the universal? It's like, human nature, people when they're in teams, whether it's Germany or the US or China, some issues you see within those teams again and again, regardless of their location.
I really think that people work with people. So one of the big concepts they always have in all sorts of books on China is this Guanxi, the bank account of how good you are in someone's books and how well connected you are, and then calling on favors. I really do think this is exactly the same in the West. We just don't have a name for it, or different name for it.
Okay, can you say the word again and spell it?
Spell it, then I would have to use Chinese heritage, which will be difficult. But so in Pinyin, it would be Guanxi, Guanxi.
Okay, Guanxi.
And that's really how well are you connected, and how can you call in favors and give favors as well.
So that's sort of a measure of your power, influence, stature.
Right. But I think, honestly, in the West, no matter whether you work in corporate or elsewhere, it's exactly the same. We just don't name it. If you know someone, you probably get somewhere faster.
Oh, certainly. I do. And so would that also include like the school you went to, and like, if you a McKinsey and Company, Harvard Business School, those kinds of credentials that stack up?
Absolutely. And who you met in these schools and are buddies with for a long time. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So that's a concept at work, and people just get more done when they have, more connections with more, power or an influence or capability. So when you're coach, does that show up in your coaching work in terms of conflict or difficulty in a team, or it just sort of is?
It does show up, but not necessarily in conflict. It's just there. And Westerners quite often, if they are over there, realize that they are not as well connected, and that it takes so much time to go to dinners and banquets and meet people and not talk business at first. So quite often we get impatient with that, because it's so important to build the relationship first.
Okay. So there's some interesting concepts at work. And so can you also share, like, when teams aren't working so well, what are the issues that you're helping them work through, and how do you get there?
Quite often it's leadership teams, and they have really not even joint business goals. So already they struggle to formulate a joint goal. And usually you have different personalities at play. As you know yourself, if you're an extrovert, you talk a lot. So the introverts don't get to see their bit, usually don't get asked enough, don't get listened to. If we talk Myers-Briggs, you have the other dimensions of having some people that are very detail-oriented and have a lot of data and facts, and then the other big thinkers, big picture people who clash on that level. And if you throw culture in the mix, it gets really interesting, because if you take a Finnish extrovert, it's probably like an American introvert.
Oh, that's fascinating. Well, let's talk about Myers-Briggs for a second then. So do you have any particular favorite anecdotes or illustrations that you like to use to make them come alive? So we'll start with extroversion versus introversion. Those who prefer extroversion, energized by the outer world and people and lots of breadth of activities. Introverts, more energized by the interior world, having some personal time, some quiet time to reflect and recollect. How do you illustrate that concept with some favorite stories or illustrations for the teams you work with?
I really like the bit when you say extrovert does talk, think, talk again, because they probably have to take something back. And an introvert think, maybe talk, and then think again. I quite like that concept because it really demonstrates quite well the big difference.
Indeed. And so have you seen that show up in terms of those aha moments in your coaching environment? Like, oh, that's what's going on there.
You have that really a lot in Asia, and that's Greater China. So that also Taiwan and Japan. The way the indirect communication goes and this hierarchy in the companies makes introverts speak even less up. So even extroverts don't really speak up because of that. So a lot of conflict doesn't even get spoken out or spoken about. And you have a lot of friction because people don't talk about things.
Certainly. All right. And how about on the sensing and intuition side of things with to orient others? The sensing folks tend to be more practical, detail-oriented, tactical. What do we need to go do now? And the intuition-preferring people tend to be more interested in kind of the big picture, the theories, the principles that underlie things, and the implications emerging from them. How do you see that show up in some harmonious and not so harmonious ways in organizations?
So what I usually do is when I have a group of people and have an exercise about this, I give the example of, let's imagine you have a colleague from the West come to the airport in Beijing, and how do you direct them to the office?
Oh, that's fun.
The N people, like you just group them up front, the N people will quite clearly say, well, tell him to get a cab and maybe give him my number and the address, and that's it.
Okay.
And the S people will go in so much detail and work out the way you could take the underground, the way you could take a taxi or an Uber, and where you get picked up with your Uber in Beijing airport, and go so much into details, data and fact is really quite funny. And I think this is then the conflict that arises out of that on various levels in all departments in companies. You see that some people just come with a lot of data and facts, and some people just really don't like the details.
Oh, certainly. And how about then on the thinking versus feeling preference? So here to orient, the thinkers tend to be making their decisions based on logic and following the rational, reasoned out implications of something, kind of like a lawyer or an engineer. And then the feelers are more interested in like the core values that are at work and how that affects people and the harmony in there, kind of like a social worker or maybe a coach along those lines.
A teacher, yeah.
Certainly.
Right.
So, and how do you see that show up?
The feeling people get in this situation, right? And normally the thinkers operate with logic and deduct their conclusions. I always try with the teams to also make them see the synergy. So I take a personal example of how we, back when my kids were very little, had to change our childminder because the one we had just couldn't work the hours we needed. And I got all feeling and emotional, and the poor woman needs to feed her family, and went down that road. And then I needed my husband, who's a thinker, to actually give me the logic and say, okay, but how much does she earn? How much would a new one earn? How many hours can she work? And really do this logic deduction, and needed to combine both to actually then come to a decision.
And what was the decision? Now we need to know.
It was the logic one.
Okay. And then how about the final set of preferences, the judging versus perceiving? So a quick recap there. Those who prefer judging tend to be more oriented toward a clear deadline. They want to get closure on things, kind of wrap it up. What's the game plan, the agenda, the timeline, all that sort of hashed out. Whereas those who prefer perceiving more things more open-ended. Let's go with the flow. Let's see what arises. Let's be kind of spontaneous and improvise as necessary because new information might come to light. So in the judging versus perceiving world, what are some things you see show up?
I think the best example is if a J takes a P for dinner. And, the P gets ready slowly, runs into a neighbor on the way, probably shows up late, then picks up the menu when you're there and goes and looks at the Sunday brunch menu. You're there on a Friday night. You're like, as a J, you're like, well, why are you looking at that? You can't pick anything from there. Well, I'm just looking. I want to know what's out there. Maybe we'll want to come back for brunch. So I think it's really, as a J, I look at the menu. I'm like, okay, I know what I want. It doesn't take long. And I'm happy I've made a decision. So I think this is, in the workplace, of course, can lead to a lot of conflict because the P people sometimes create a lot of stress for J by having like last minute requests for whatever strategy presentations and the likes. And the J people can be really annoying by having all this planning and scheduling going on, which quite often you have to change anyway because life is change, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, that's a fun little rundown there. And could you now, I enjoyed perusing your website and reading a bit of your pieces when it comes to humility and assertiveness and navigating that effectively. What are some of your insights along those lines?
So one of the really big things for me was, and this is even bigger if you compare China to America rather than China to any European country. Americans, looking at it from the outside, I feel are very good at self-marketing and selling themselves. And that's just something in China people don't do very much. It's getting more, but it's not really done that much. And so in China, you have quite often the big boss who just lets the actions speak for themselves. And if the work is good, the leader is good. And that's very different here in America. Europe, we tend to self-market a little bit. Germany, probably not that much. But in America, that's something that's done heavily. And so that's a very, very big difference for me.
Absolutely. Well, this is fun. So, well, tell me, before I shift gears a little bit into hearing some of your favorite things with our Fast Faves segment, tell me, is there anything else that you really want to make sure that you share because it's super useful for folks seeking to become more awesome at their jobs?
So I think if you work with a different culture, just come with an open mind, whatever the other culture is. And also take it with a grain of salt and a bit of humor, because sometimes I think we just make it too big and it's just not that important. The differences are not that big.
Certainly.
It's people working with people.
That's lovely. Okay. Well, now I'd love to hear a little bit. Can you share with us maybe first a favorite quote, something that you find inspiring?
I want to take Bruce Lee. Be water, my friend. I can tell you why.
Let's do it.
Because having been thrown into a very different culture twice now, and in China having to learn the language as well, I think you need to be adaptable. And water is. You need to be flexible. And, water, if it flows in a river and across the stones long enough, it will shape the stone. So I think persistence is also in there somewhere.
Oh, lovely.
So I like this. I love the quote.
And how about a favorite study or piece of research you find yourself referring to often?
I want to go back to the beginning. It's this positive outlook, and that's also working with different cultures. If you have a positive outlook and view of life, I think you do much better. And I read a very, very good book, which is called Biology of Belief. And that one is by Bruce Lipton. What I like about it is that he says a cell will thrive and grow in a positive environment, but it will wither and die in a negative environment. And I think you can take that on a big scale. It's exactly the same for people.
Oh, that's cool. And so you mentioned one book. Is there another book you would put out there as among your favorites?
I can give you like 10,000 books. But so one of my really favorite books is The Diamond Cutter. I have to say, I love that book. And another one, I can't quite decide, I like both a lot, is called Sleeping, Dreaming, Dying.
Whoa.
Where neuroscientists and psychologists speak to the Dalai Lama and his team and compare the science, the newly found science with Buddhism. And it's just very, very good read.
Oh, that does sound fascinating. Mm. How about a favorite website or online resource?
I really do like LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. I think if you have...
that's where we found each other.
Right.
You made a comment and I said, oh, interesting.
Yeah. I shared something I really liked that a very good podcast you did.
Oh, shucks.
And I really think you find very, if you connect it to the real people you meet and also keep your connections, open enough to meet new people, you can find really, really good stuff on there. So I do like LinkedIn. Another one I do like for short ideas, I just found that it's called the Idea Pod. I really like that because they make it short. So you can publish blogs, but you have to keep it short and sweet. I like that one as well.
Oh, great. And how about a favorite habit, a personal practice of yours that's really given you a boost to your personal effectiveness?
I've got to say running.
All right.
So one of the things I do is run. And that's, for me, that's very mind clearing and gives me a lot of new ideas or how to tackle a problem, helps me like to solve problems. So if I have to decide on one habit, it will be running.
All right. And how about sort of a favorite nugget that when you share during your programs, you really see people like nod their heads and go, ah, yes, or taking notes at an accelerated rate? What's something that you share that seems to really resonate with folks?
So one of the things I had a lot of reactions to is not only humility, but patience. So one of the things that seems to move people a lot is patience something that you can learn? Or is it something that's kind of innate? And I find this subject very interesting, above all working with people and coaching people.
Okay. And how about the ideal way to find you? If folks want to learn more or get in touch with you, where would you point them?
I'd point them at my website or LinkedIn. It's www.atkinson-coaching.com.
All right. And how about a favorite challenge or parting words, call to action for those seeking to be more awesome at their jobs?
Now I have to give you another quote from The Empire Strikes Back.
Oh,
you
yes.
probably know that. Do or do not. There is no try.
Okay. Well, Julia, thanks so much for being here on the How to Be Awesome at Your Job podcast. This was a lot of fun, and I wish you all the best in your coaching and working with folks and all that you do.
Thanks a lot, Peter. It was great to talk to you. Thanks for having me.
All right. Hopefully you've got a broader worldview and perspective and adaptability flowing now. And if you want to check out a review of some of this stuff, that's at awesomeatyourjob.com/ep31. And hope you have a great weekend.
Thanks for joining us for today's episode. To get the most out of this conversation, visit awesomeatyourjob.com to find today's show notes, transcript, and infographic summary cheat sheet. For more entertaining professional skill sharpening, be sure to subscribe to catch the next episode of How to Be Awesome at Your Job.